on, guys? Welcome back to Spot Goes. I am Spot. I am your host, if you want to call me a host. But what I'm here to do today is I'm going to share with you a story about the first time that I arrived in Hawaii. Now, as many of you may know if you've seen my other video, I discussed how I arrived in Hawaii my most recent time, but there was another time I actually came to Hawaii when I was much younger. I was about 22 years old, and I literally had $300. I had a one-way ticket, and I had the clothes on my back. But before I get into that story, I want to thank the Patreon of my channel, and I also want to just thank everybody who comes by, watches it, leaves it a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a comment. I do appreciate all the feedback. And to be honest, I'm still trying to find my kind of direction here on the channel as far as what I'm going to do and what type of stuff. I'm really interested in making short films as well as these types of videos. So if you have any feedback, comments, or criticism on that, I'm always ready to listen. So the first time I arrived in Hawaii, I was, like I said, about 22, 23 years old, and I was, I was a restless kid. I was, I don't know if kid is the right word, but I was a restless young adult. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have any education. Well, I had high school. I graduated high school, but I was a C- student at best. I was just a really like a boat without a rudder. And so previous to coming to Hawaii, I had actually got into these jobs working seasonal in national parks. Like, for example, I went and I worked in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming for the summer, and then when that ended, recruiters actually came for ski resorts in the winter, and so I ended up getting a job as a janitor in Colorado. I mean, mainly the job is just so you can get that free ski pass and go snowboarding every day. So when that started to end, I started to think about what I was going to do, and for some reason I got this idea that I really wanted to learn how to surf. And so, hey, all I knew was Hawaii was warm, which was different than where I was in Colorado, and they had surf there. So what I did was I got a one-way ticket. I saved up my janitor money. I got a one-way ticket, and I had the clothes on my back, and I had saved up about $300, which even then was not a whole hell of a lot. I got the $300, and I also had, in my clothes on my back, I had one set of nice clothes for job interviews, and I also had printed out, remember those when you printed out your resumes? I had printed resumes that I brought with me, and with that I pretty much boarded a plane, and I got my way out to Colorado. Now, I'd never been to Hawaii. I never had I had no frame of reference. All I knew was from maybe watching some Hawaii Five-0, some movies, hula girls and grass skirts. That's all I kind of remember thinking about at the time. But I just knew the weather was warm and they had surf. And also, I think I remember seeing the movie Animal Chin, a Pal Peralta skate video where they skated the wallows, and that was about all I had to reference me to. So when I got over the islands and we were coming down into Honolulu, which is where I bought my ticket towards, I could see the skyline, the Waikiki skyline, which really at the time I didn't know it was all hotels and whatnot. But to me, it looked like LA on the beach, and I still kind of think like that now. But it's of course not nearly the scale, anyways. But it wasn't anything that I imagined. So I got off the plane, and since I had such little money, I didn't want to take a taxi. So I grabbed a city bus, and I was going to go to a youth hostel. And as I was on the city bus out to the youth hostel, going through all the different parts of downtown Honolulu and everything, I said, this just is not for me. This is much more busy than I imagined. It was just a lot busier than I imagined. And so I immediately started thinking about going to one of the outer islands. I arrived at my guest house, which was in Mānoa, which is in a valley. It's part of Honolulu, and I spent a couple of days here walking around Waikiki and just kind of overwhelmed with the sheer number of people, buildings, and everything. It wasn't at all what I imagined. And again, this was all my fault for not doing any kind of due diligence. So I decided what I was going to do after a couple of days. I was going to go over to Maui. So I got back to my youth hostel, and I packed my backpack, and I got down to the bus stop to get the next plane over to Maui. And while I was at the bus stop, there a lady, she was looking at me, she was looking at my backpack. She asked me, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, I just moved here. I'm just traveling." She said, "Oh, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going. I think we go to Maui." She said, "Oh, wow, I have an uncle over there. Maybe he'll give you a job. He works at a place called Cheeseburger in Paradise. It's in Lahaina." And that's all I knew about. That's where I was like, okay, that's where I'm gonna go. I'm going to Lahaina. So I got on the plane and I got to the airport. I arrived in Maui at night, and this was like this is one of those things that I don't think I'll ever forget. But what happened was, I arrived at night, and again, because I didn't want to spend money on a taxi, and Maui, as most people know, is much more rural than Oahu. There isn't the bus infrastructure as there is here. So when I realized that it was a taxi or nothing at that point, and it was night, I just started to walk, and I just started to walk towards Lahaina, which the airport is in Kahului, which is, I don't know how far it is mileage-wise, but I'm going to say it's 20 miles. But I think my plan at the time was just to walk far enough out of the airport and stick my thumb out and hopefully get a ride. So I'm walking down the highway in Maui. It's dark. I'm sweating, and then all of a sudden it just starts to rain, just pouring buckets of rain, right? So I'm trying to hitchhike, and nobody wants to pick me up, or nobody's picking me up, and I don't know if it's because it's raining or because it's at night, but I probably wouldn't pick myself up either in hindsight. So I'm wearing. I remember I was wearing a thin raincoat. I had a raincoat, but it didn't breathe, and it was still hot even though it was raining. It was absolutely miserable. I was just trying to keep myself dry, but the rain didn't get me, the sweat would. I just remember sweat pouring down my face and my body and whatever. So after a while, I decided to give up on the whole hitchhiking idea, and I was going to find a place to sleep, and then I was going to try to hitchhike in the morning. So I'm walking down the roads, and there were some cane fields, some sugarcane fields, and so I just walked into some sugarcane fields and threw my backpack down and slept on my I had like a ground cloth or something. So, but no tent. So all night, if I took the rain jacket off, the mosquitoes would just chew the shit out of me. So all night it was either like sweat and not get bit, or get bit and not sweat. It was a miserable night. So when dawn broke, I got my stuff together and I went back out to the highway and I stuck my thumb out, and this guy pulls over and he picks me up, and he's driving an old pickup truck, and I get in, and he's a local guy, so to this day, and especially at that time, I don't know if it's Hawaiian or not, but he was speaking Pidgin, which at the time I had almost no exposure to, so I could kind of understand what he was saying, but a lot of the slang and stuff I didn't get. So he asked me, where are you going, what are you doing? And I told him, and I told him I was going to Lahaina. I maybe could get a job there. And he says, hey, you also might want to try Honolulu, which is a couple miles north. It's a big resort area. He's like, they might have a job for you there too. It's a good place to look. I worked there when I was younger. And then I said, okay, thanks a lot. And I was, he was driving that way. And then he said to me, he said, oh, you like grind? And I'm like, what? He says, you like grind? And I'm like, I couldn't understand at that time what he was saying. And he goes, just reach under your seat. And he pulled out, and I reached under there, and there was a big metal tin, like a flat tin, full of saimin. It was like saimin, which is a noodle dish with spam and vegetables, and sliced spam and vegetables. It was just a big thing, and I was hungry. And he goes, yeah, here, go. And he told me to eat, and I did, and it was just, it was really cool. And I look back on that, and he was the first guy that really. He wasn't the first guy, but it was just one of those things that this guy, he's helping me out for just to be a nice guy, and I guess that's Aloha in its truest form, and I always remember that guy 20 years later. Anyways, I arrive he drops me off in Kaanapali, which is a couple miles north of Lahaina, because I thought I would take his advice and go to the resorts. So I did that, and I went to the these were all big corporate resorts, think like Marriott and Hyatt and who else, Hilton, and all these, big, Sheraton. They're big resorts with HR departments, and it's not like a mom and pop shop where you can walk in and ask for a job. So I went into a bathroom, I put on my one set of kind of interview clothes, and I went in, and I filled out the application. But the thing was, this was before everyone had cell phones. I didn't have a phone number, and I didn't have an address. So when people asked where I was staying, I said, I don't know. I'm looking for a place. And I was getting later, I didn't know it, but you could actually set up what's called a general delivery at your post office for mail. I didn't know that at the time, but you can. So I went in, I'd meet with these HR people, and I was really applying for any job, server, dishwasher, busboy, anything really. I didn't care. I would do anything just to work. But it always came down to the same thing. You don't have an address, and you don't have a phone number. This is before everyone had cell phones. So they're like, come back and see us when you have these two things. So I left. I felt pretty defeated. I went to about 3 resorts, and I heard the same thing every time. So I ended up thumbing it down to Lahaina, and I was living on, at the time, I was living on Foodland day-old chicken and McDonald's triple cheeseburgers for $1, whatever it was, something like that. You know, just the cheapest caloric food I could take, and I was really running low on money. I was there a couple days. I slept on the beach. I slept on the beach for those 2 days. And like I said, I was just eating whatever was cheapest, and yeah, I was cruising around. I mean, it wasn't miserable. I also did bring with me a snorkel set. So I was in a park one day. I was sitting there with my backpack, and a guy approached me. He, you know, I'm sure it was my backpack. You know, if you have a backpack and you don't look like you're homeless, and my backpack was nice. I think you're a lot more approachable for people, and that's what this guy approached me, asked me where I was going, that sort of thing. I told him my story, and he thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Hey, listen. If you're not afraid of work, you can stay on my couch for a few days, and you just need to pick up the mangoes in my yard." He said, "You got to, you know, mangoes and pie, do some yard work, and you can stay on my couch, and you can use my phone number for employers and my address." And so I jumped on the opportunity. I said, "Absolutely." So not only did it solve my housing problem, but it also solved a lot of my nutrition problem, because one man cannot just live on double cheeseburgers alone. So I got to his place. It was, you know, a nice little house right in the middle of Lahaina, which is where I was looking for a job. And I immediately began to use that number, and I was out every day. I mean, yeah, I would go out every day. Like, getting a job was my job at that time, but I'd also get to go out and snorkel and swim and that sort of thing. And I was looking to buy a surfboard, because I was, you know, by this time a week or so had gone by, and I was getting down to probably about $100, or I was getting really low. So I wasn't doing anything but really the bare necessities, which at that point was eating, or if I needed to pay for a bus or whatever, I would do that. But it was basically, it was all business. And so after a couple weeks of pounding the pavement, I actually got a job. I got 2 jobs. So the first was I got a job at a little cafe as a barista. So I was making coffee, not just, you know, typical barista stuff, minimum wage with tips. So I don't know, at that point I didn't care, because I was living on the couch, I had no overhead, so just any money and free coffee. So now I was getting mangoes off the tree, and I was getting coffee, and yeah, mangoes off the tree and drinking coffee, and I still living on day-old chicken and double cheeseburgers. So but things were looking up. So after I got this part-time job at the coffee shop, I bought a surfboard, and I started to paddle out every morning, or almost every morning, and just go for a little surf at the Lahaina breakwall there, which is a great beginner spot if you're coming over to Hawaii, if you're coming over to Maui. So after a couple more weeks, I ended up getting a job as a busboy at the Hard Rock Cafe. And the Hard Rock Cafe was also in Lahaina, and that was a big step up, because now I was getting real food, and I was getting, the money was pretty decent at the time. And so after a few weeks of working both jobs, the guy who allowed me to stay on his couch, he was kind of hinting it was time to move on now that I was getting on my feet, and I was cool with that. I had saved up enough money, and one day I was walking home, and I saw this camouflage green bus, Volkswagen bus, on Front Street in Lahaina, and I think the guy was asking $800. It was a 68 VW bus. It was pretty busted up looking, but it did run. So I thought, that's going to be the ticket. So what I did is I bought this bus from the guy, and I moved into the bus, and I was working at the Hard Rock Cafe, and I was working at the coffee shop, and I was, you know, I spent a couple $100 dialing in my bus, you know, putting a bed in there, putting in a, you know, just dialing it in, and that's where I started living, and that is really how I got my start in Maui. I mean, there's a lot more to the story. Maybe I'll tell that in the next video, what happens after the bus, but that is essentially, in a nutshell, how I ended up moving to Hawaii, one-way ticket, $300, and yeah, I look at it now, and I don't know if I'd do the same thing in my advanced age at 44, but when I was 22, 23, hell, why not? And I don't know, maybe I would. Maybe I would now. If I didn't have a wife and a kid, yeah, I'm still capable of doing incredibly stupid stuff. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please leave it a thumbs up or leave a comment, or check out my Patreon page if you want. I put photography stuff over there. I put you know, just random blog stuff over there. So if you're all interested in anything over there, feel free to check it out. And aloha.